Take a second and actually look at your hand. Doesn't matter if it's pale enough to vanish against a sheet of paper, or dark enough to look like it was built to catch sunlight, that color isn't an accident of birth. It's the finish line of one of the longest, weirdest, most high-stakes makeovers any species has ever gone through. Here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. None of it was random. No coin flip. No cosmic shrug. What you're looking at is the physical scar tissue of a war, a slow, silent, tens of thousands of years-long standoff between your ancestors and the sun. And the sun fought dirty the entire time. So how did we get here? Buckle up, because this one drags in vitamin D, cancer, folate, Africa, an ice age or two, farmers who accidentally rewrote human DNA without knowing it, and one deeply unbothered star sitting 93 million miles away that started all of it and never once apologized. Rewind the human story far enough, and you hit a wall. Every ancestor you have, no matter what continent your family comes from today, had dark skin. Not most of them. Not the majority. Literally all of them. Roughly 300,000 years ago, when our species first showed up in Africa, dark skin wasn't one option among many, it was the only option. Pale skin? Didn't exist. Fair-skinned populations anywhere on the planet is zero. The idea of light skin simply hadn't been invented by nature yet. Let that sink in for a moment. Every face in every history book, every ancient empire, every myth passed down, every cave painting, trace it all back, and it lands on one single population that looked nothing like a massive share of humanity today. Which raises an obvious question: something had to change. And it did. Whatever caused that shift was powerful enough to physically rewrite entire populations across multiple continents, over tens of thousands of years. So what was the trigger? Hold that thought. First we need 30 seconds on what skin actually is, because most people are walking around with zero idea what this organ is doing for them right now. Most of us think of skin as packaging. The wrapping paper your organs came in, the bag that holds you together while you argue with strangers online. Wrong. Skin is an organ, your single biggest one. And it's quietly running about 47 different jobs at the same time, most of which never get a thank you. One of the biggest, standing guard against UV radiation. UV is the sun's invisible ammunition, fired at Earth non-stop, and it is absolutely not on your side. It snaps chemical bonds. It scrambles DNA. It seeds mutations in your cells, and enough of the wrong mutations, given enough time, become cancer. Melanoma, specifically, one of the nastiest skin cancers out there. And this is exactly where skin color walks onto the stage. The pigment responsible for skin color, melanin, is, no exaggeration, a literal sunscreen. Built in. Always switched on. No reapplying needed. The more melanin packed into your skin, the darker it looks, and the harder it is for UV to punch through into the deeper layers where your DNA actually lives. Dark skin was never just an aesthetic. It's armor. Which is exactly why, in Africa, the birthplace of our species, sitting beneath some of the harshest UV exposure on Earth, evolution came down hard in favor of dark skin and fast. More melanin equaled better protected DNA. Fewer cancer-causing mutations piling up. Longer life, better health, and, the only metric evolution actually cares about, a higher shot at surviving long enough to reproduce. Because here's the thing about natural selection, it's a brutally patient optimization machine. It has no taste. It doesn't care what looks good. It isn't chasing some ideal image of what a human should look like. It just runs the same cold question, over and over, billions of times, across billions of living things. Does this trait help you live long enough to pass on your genes? A yes means the trait sticks around. A no means it's erased. And under the equatorial sun, dark skin scored an unambiguous yes, generation after generation, without exception. But here's your first plot twist. The story was about to get a lot messier. Turns out UV doesn't stop at your skin cells. It reaches further, targeting something microscopic, something you'd never notice missing until it was already too late. Something capable of ending a pregnancy before most people would even realize one had started. That something is folate, vitamin B9, quietly circulating through your bloodstream, running essential maintenance. If you're thinking, isn't that just something my doctor nags me about? Stick with me, because this detail changes everything. Here's why it matters so much for skin color. Folate builds the neural tube in a developing embryo, the earliest version of what becomes the brain and spinal cord. Run short on folate in the first few weeks of pregnancy, often before a woman even knows she's expecting, and that neural tube can fail to seal shut. The fallout is brutal: severe birth defects, miscarriage. And UV light is a folate killer. It penetrates skin, hits the bloodstream, and tears folate molecules apart on contact. Now picture equatorial Africa: no clothes, no roofs, no sunscreen, constant unfiltered sun. That's a second, brutal selection pressure stacking on top of the first. Women with lighter skin, less melanin, and deeper UV penetration lost folate faster. Faster folate loss meant more neural tube defects. More neural tube defects meant fewer children surviving to adulthood. Add it up, and you've got two entirely separate biological reasons dark skin was non-negotiable under the African sun. Reason 1, melanin shields DNA, cutting cancer risk. Reason 2, melanin shields folate, protecting pregnancies. Two completely different threats. One single fix. In Africa, dark skin wasn't a nice to have. It was mandatory for the species to even survive. So at this point, dark skin looks like some kind of biological cheat code, blocking cancer, guarding folate, battle-tested across hundreds of thousands of years. If evolution handed out star ratings, dark skin would be sitting at a flawless 5, with a mountain of 5-star reviews. Which makes the next part genuinely strange. Why did it ever change? Why did the descendants of people who left Africa end up paler and paler with every passing generation? Here's where evolution pulls off one of its most elegant, most ruthless trade-offs. Somewhere between 70,000 and 100,000 years ago, small groups of Homo sapiens started drifting out of Africa. Nobody planned it. There was no announcement, no single dramatic exodus, just slow, generational creep. One group wanders slightly further than their parents did. Their kids wander further still. Multiply that by thousands of years, and humans have spread through the Middle East, into Europe, across Asia, eventually all the way into the Americas. And somewhere in that long walk north, the rules of the game quietly flipped. Not because the sun changed, the sun stayed exactly as indifferent as always. It's about geometry. At higher latitudes, sunlight strikes at a shallower angle and has to cut through far more atmosphere to reach you. UV gets scattered and filtered before it lands. Daylight hours shrink. Winters stretch out, dark and endless. Months at a time under gray, overcast sky. This is Northern Europe, Northern Asia, Canada we're talking about. A completely different UV world from equatorial Africa. Down south, you needed to block a relentless flood of radiation. Up north, you were suddenly short on a resource you desperately needed to soak up. And just like that, the dark skin that had been a lifesaver in Africa turned into a liability. Not from cancer, weak northern UV meant that threat basically evaporated. Not from folate loss either, less UV meant folate stayed intact, so that box was still checked. The real problem was something this story rarely gets credit for. Vitamin D. Your skin builds vitamin D when UVB radiation strikes a compound called 7-dehydrocholesterol sitting in your cells. Essentially, your skin doubles as a solar panel, converting sunlight directly into a molecule your body cannot function without. And vitamin D isn't a nice extra. Not even slightly. It's foundational to staying alive and healthy. It governs how well your gut absorbs calcium and phosphorus. Skip it, and calcium goes largely unabsorbed no matter how much milk or cheese you're eating. Skip calcium, and your bones stop forming properly. In kids, a severe shortage causes rickets, bones so soft they bow outward, skulls that flatten, growth that stalls out entirely. In grown women, the same deficiency causes osteomalacia, softening the pelvic bones, which turns childbirth into something dangerous, sometimes lethal. Women with serious vitamin D shortages died in labor at dramatically higher rates. And the damage doesn't stop at bones. It also weakens your immune defenses, leaving you more open to infection. It chips away at muscle strength. It affects heart health. Some studies even tie chronic deficiency to depression and cognitive decline. Vitamin D is involved in so much of your biology that running low on it can knock out several systems at once. So now imagine a dark-skinned person standing in Northern Europe roughly 40,000 years ago. Their melanin is doing its job flawlessly. Perfect for blocking African strength sun. Except now they're under a dim, overcast northern sky, and that same melanin is choking off the small amount of UV they actually need to make vitamin D. Skin doesn't distinguish between dangerous UV, please block, and essential UV, please let through. It just blocks indiscriminately. Vitamin D production tanks. Calcium absorption falls. Bones weaken. Kids start developing rickets. Mothers start dying in childbirth. Populations start shrinking. What used to be a survival advantage had flipped into a serious liability. In a world with zero supplements, zero fortified food, zero modern medicine, this was a slow-motion death sentence spanning generations. And evolution, patient, indifferent, always keeping score, started working against dark skin for maybe the first time in human history. Random mutations that reduced melanin output began cropping up, the way random mutations always do. Except this time, instead of disappearing, they spread, because the people carrying them made more vitamin D, grew stronger bones, and had more children survive. Generation after generation, the shift compounded, a little lighter, a little lighter, a little lighter again. Over thousands of years, northern populations kept drifting paler. Not by choice. Not because of culture or fashion or preference, purely because in that specific latitude, under that specific sky, lighter skin kept more people alive long enough to reproduce. Evolution's calculation had simply flipped its answer. For decades, the assumption among scientists was that this lightening happened gradually, a slow crawl stretched across hundreds of thousands of years as people spread north. But here's a twist nobody saw coming. Recent ancient DNA work has torn that theory apart. Early European hunter-gatherers, people who'd lived at northern latitudes for tens of thousands of years already, were still, surprisingly, quite dark-skinned. Even after that much time living up north, they hadn't lightened much at all. The clearest example is a skeleton nicknamed Cheddar Man, who lived in what's now Britain roughly 10,000 years ago. When his DNA was sequenced in 2018, it delivered a plot twist: dark to medium dark skin, dark curly hair, and blue eyes. A combo that feels almost contradictory today, since we've been conditioned to associate blue eyes with pale skin. 10,000 years ago, that link simply didn't exist. The extremely fair skin we now think of as classically Northwestern European, the kind that turns pink after 12 minutes outside, only became widespread in the last 6,000 to 8,000 years. Which is stunningly recent. Stack that against the full 300,000-year run of Homo sapiens, and it's barely the final 3% of the timeline. So what flipped this into overdrive 6,000 to 8,000 years back? The trigger is one of the single biggest turning points in human history, and almost nobody connects it to skin color. Farming. The Neolithic shift away from hunting and gathering completely rewired human diets, practically overnight in evolutionary terms. Hunter-gatherers ate a broad, varied diet naturally loaded with vitamin D, oily fish like salmon and mackerel, organ meats like liver and kidney, shellfish, all among the richest natural vitamin D sources on the planet. Farmers, by contrast, ate mostly grain, wheat, barley, oats, rye. Dietary vitamin D didn't just dip. It cratered. Suddenly, populations that had been supplementing sun-made vitamin D with dietary vitamin D were now relying almost entirely on their skin alone. If that skin was still dark, the math didn't work anymore. Selection pressure for lighter skin went into overdrive. Even a small bump in vitamin D production, even a tiny drop in melanin, became a matter of survival. And a second factor cranked up the speed even further. Farming populations were dense, packed together, settled in one place. And density is a massive accelerant for how fast a helpful mutation can spread through a population's gene pool. In a scattered band of 50 hunter-gatherers, a useful mutation might crawl toward neighboring groups over centuries. In a farming village of hundreds, linked to a web of nearby villages, that same mutation can rip through thousands of people in just a handful of generations. Put the diet collapse and the population density together, and you've essentially hit fast forward on European depigmentation. Within a few thousand years, a pressure that had been gently nudging skin tones lighter for tens of millennia suddenly turned intense, fast, and unmistakable in the fossil record. And here's something that trips up almost everyone the first time they hear it: skin color isn't controlled by one single gene. There's no dark skin switch versus light skin switch battling it out. It's far messier than that. Skin pigmentation is polygenic. Dozens of separate genes work together to control it: how much melanin gets made, what form it takes, how it's distributed across skin cells, and how skin reacts to UV over time. And here's the part that's genuinely wild. Populations that independently evolved lighter skin didn't necessarily use the same genetic toolkit to get there. East Asians and Europeans both ended up with noticeably lighter skin than equatorial Africans, yet the actual gene variants behind that lightening are largely different between the two groups. Same destination, entirely separate routes. Scientists call this convergent evolution, the same solution, lighter skin under low UV, getting independently reinvented through completely different genetic pathways, on completely different continents. Think about the implication for a second. The pressure toward lighter skin was so strong, so consistent, so unmistakable that natural selection landed on the same answer more than once. Not once. Not twice. Multiple separate times, completely independently. And when evolution keeps reinventing the exact same fix from scratch in different places, that's about as loud a signal as biology can give that a trait genuinely matters for survival. While we're already deep in genetics territory, here's a bonus mindbender that ties right in. Blue eyes. Every single blue-eyed person walking around today, every one, no exceptions, descends from one specific person. One human. One mutation. One moment, likely somewhere near the Black Sea, roughly 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. Before that person existed, every human on Earth had brown eyes. All of them. Brown, brown, and more brown as far back as the record goes. Then a single mutation appeared, dialing down melanin production specifically in the iris, and it spread. Slow at first, then quicker, likely riding along with the same skin-lightening genes that were already under heavy selection pressure. So think about that for a second. Blue eyes, something that feels ancient, primal, baked into humanity forever, something people have used to divide populations for centuries, is actually younger than farming itself. Younger than Stonehenge. Younger than humans domesticating horses. We treat certain human traits as timeless and fixed when, geologically speaking, they're practically brand new. The version of normal we think we're looking at is still very much a work in progress. So let's pull the camera back and look at the whole arc: skin color, the trait that has shaped so much of human history, propped up political systems, been used to justify atrocities, and sorted people into rigid hierarchies for centuries, is, stripped down to its biology, nothing more than a UV calibration dial. An adjustment knob. Your body's best guess, inherited from your ancestors, about how much sun protection you need based on where they lived, what they ate, and how much sunlight they got. Light skin isn't objectively better. In equatorial regions, it's genuinely dangerous. More UV gets in, more DNA damage happens, cancer risk climbs, folate takes a hit. In Africa, light skin is a straightforward survival disadvantage. And dark skin isn't some outdated or primitive version of skin. It's the ancestral baseline, the factory setting everything else got modified from. If anything, lighter skin is the newer invention. The edit. The variation. Dark skin is the default setting for our species. And here's the sharpest irony in the whole story: the exact same sun that pushed some populations toward more melanin to survive its intensity also pushed other populations toward less melanin because they were starving for whatever weak light they could get. The sun never picked sides. It never had a preference either way. It just radiated with total indifference and let natural selection sort out the winners and losers. Meanwhile, we went and built entire civilizations worth of prejudice, oppression, and social hierarchy on top of what is, underneath everything, a vitamin D shortage. A calcium absorption glitch. a folate defense mechanism. And here's a fact most people never stop to consider: we're all still evolving. Slowly, almost invisibly within one human lifetime, but it hasn't stopped. The pressures that shaped skin color are still technically present in our environment, even though modern life has muted most of their force. We've got vitamin D supplements now. We've got sunscreen. We've got fortified food, artificial lighting, heated homes, and food shipped in from every latitude on the planet year-round. We've essentially built a civilization that unplugs skin biology from the job it originally evolved to do. The evolutionary machinery is still technically running, we've just swapped out the inputs. What that means for humans 100,000 years from now is genuinely anyone's guess. Evolution doesn't send out progress updates. But here's what we can say with total certainty: every skin tone alive on Earth right now traces back to that same original population, standing under the African sun, gradually fanning out across an unpredictable planet, each shade a literal record, written into melanin, of exactly which environments a person's ancestors survived. Every skin tone is an answer to a question the sun asked, and somehow, every single answer turned out to be correct. So next time you catch yourself looking at your own skin, or anyone else's, remember this isn't random pigmentation, it's a survival receipt passed down across hundreds of centuries. What do you think shaped your own family's skin tone the most? Latitude, diet, or something else entirely? Tell me in the comments. I actually read all of them, and if this kind of hidden in plain sight biology is your thing, hit subscribe, because there's a lot more of this coming.